Hello, this is Kelly Hill, technology reporter and editor for Test and Measurement with RCR Wireless News. This week on Carrier Wrap, we're exploring the competitive landscape when it comes to wireless and wired services, including broadband and cable. In general, the industry seems to be seeing more wireline players get into wireless and more wireless players expanding their broadband and content offerings. We just recently had Verizon confirm that it plans to launch a new streaming service later this summer. And Verizon has also certainly been talking up its ability to provide fixed broadband access in the context of 5G. Meanwhile, you also had Comcast recently launch its wireless service, Xfinity Mobile. So joining us for this conversation are two analysts and longtime industry experts, Bill Ho of 556 Ventures and Dan Hayes of PwC. So we're going to spend some time with Bill first, so let's take a look at that interview. This is Kelly Hill with RCR Wireless News. I'm here with Bill Ho of 556 Ventures. How are you, Bill?
Well, thanks. Nice to see you, Kelly.
Nice to talk with you, Bill. So we're going to be discussing Xfinity Mobile and some of the consequences or, I guess, implications for the wireless industry and the competitive landscape. We just had Comcast launch its Xfinity Mobile wireless service, an MVNO using Verizon's network. Bill, what do you think about this as a strategy and, and the implications for what it means for competitors like Verizon and AT&T?
Well, the Xfinity mobile launch is their second, for those people who've been in the wireless industry for a while. The cable companies launched with Sprint and it was called Pivot Wireless. So I think the cable sector, specifically Comcast, views that wireless is a necessity for growth opportunities, which is basically upselling their existing base, which Xfinity Mobile is targeted to, and just toe in the water for wireless as we get into probably 5G when AT&T and Verizon get into it a lot more. So I think it's right now the short term is they have to get into wireless as a means to give their subscribers a less expensive alternative and a bundled alternative to just standalone AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. And then, so mostly a customer stickiness play then, and bringing in some additional revenue, based off of wireless service.
Sure. The last quarterly announcement, Comcast showed about $149 as the average account value. So if you add, multiple lines on there, you can easily at 45 or 45 times 4. 160. That helps that our PA figure.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Just in the revenues.
Yeah. Absolutely. So then, what do you think? Where does that leave the pure play wireless folks? You've got Verizon making content deals and looking to do all kinds of sort of comprehensive offerings. AT&T obviously is looking at the same thing. Now we have cable, offering their content as well as broadband and wireless. What does that mean for the pure play wireless players that we do still have?
I think from the short term, if we look at all the rumblings within media and financial analysts, they basically want the two, Sprint and T-Mobile, to get together. So they will stay pure play for a while unless they can offer a wireless broadband option in the future with their spectrum. So a consolidated Sprint and T-Mobile can offer something similar in the wireless broadband product for maybe urban areas. But I think the more important competitive view is that in 19 and 20, when Verizon and AT&T launched their 5G standalone services, particularly with AT&T being a lot more competitive because they can bring a bundle to the picture, which means a DirecTV Now product on top of the wireless broadband. So they will be a lot more competitive against a Comcast or a Charter.
Yeah. And 5G really does play into this, I think, because, you have Verizon, being very bullish in terms of the opportunity there that they see for fixed wireless service, beyond their broadband footprint.
Yeah, certainly. So one of the things about 5G, I think a lot of people have played up is that it's just not wireless broadband. It's not just fastest speed, although you can get greater than 1 gigabit throughput with LTE Advanced Pro. I think that in the future, it's about sharing that pipe. So we can get 1 gigabyte per customer, as opposed to 1 gigabit per second throughput, and then shared with several users, which means that you're not getting 1 gig. So I think for the future standpoint, it's important to have 1 gig, I guess, from a marketing angle in the wireless broadband or even the fixed broadband context.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for your thoughts today, Bill. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
So that wraps up Bill's take on things. Next, we're going to talk with Dan Hayes of PwC on his views on the interplay of mobility, content, and broadband access in the competitive landscape. So here's that interview. This is Kelly Hill, technology reporter with RCR Wireless News. I'm here today with Dan Hayes, who is a partner in PwC's strategy consulting practice. We are going to be talking triple play. We're going to touch on content, and we're also going to talk about the role of mobility in the competitive landscape these days. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great, Kelly. Thanks so much for having me.
Great. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to talk with us today. So let's start off with kind of looking at the competitive landscape. We've got mobile players who are really trying to focus on things like content. We've got folks talking about using fixed wireless as a strategy to serve residential and enterprise customers, particularly in the context of 5G. And then we have cable guys and kind of some of the fixed players who are also talking mobility. So where does this leave us in terms of, how things are shaping up competitively?
Yeah, well, look, after years, it seems like, of consolidation in the industry and going from, 8 major players down to, 4 or 5, we're really at an interesting time in the mobile space. It really hasn't been probably in the last decade that we've seen the number of new entrants and new business models popping up within this space. And there's a lot of interesting things going on. The recent announcements from the cable industry about their intent to get into mobility as a core service are really exciting and, quite frankly, maybe a bit challenging for the incumbent providers. The cable companies have great motivations. Now, they don't have a terrific track record of playing in this space. There's been a couple of failed attempts in many years past, but they really seem to be quite committed to it at this point. And the mobile offerings are just starting to emerge. We won't quite know what they all look like and how fast their ability to acquire subscribers will be. But in many ways, they have a great proposition, and between their cable assets, broadband, and video, as well as some of their content that they own. It could really be a significant threat for the wireless industry.
Let's talk a little bit more about the role of content, because it seems like there's a real focus on that, I think, not just from the cable side, definitely, typically from that traditional cable company perspective, but, you have some of the big telcos who are looking to increasingly get involved in content as well. And then obviously, you have folks thinking very hard about the role of OTT, whether they're going to come up with their own OTT, streaming offering, or, how they're going to, to think about the role of content. So, what's your perspective on that?
Well, content has got to be central to the strategies and the product offerings for the cable companies. And let's face it, in a wireless market like we have today, which has moved very quickly from a voice-centric focus to a data-centric focus, there's got to be something to differentiate, a new provider, even if it's an MVNO, from the incumbent providers. There's just no way around it. There's nothing to motivate people if it's not different, other than what we've seen over the last year or two: cost. Cost only gets you so far when it comes down to it. So we expect that the cable companies are really going to use content as a core differentiation strategy. But it doesn't always have to be just content that they own. If we look at the cable companies, what they really happen to be tremendously good at these days is content delivery. So they've moved from just, flick the remote control and find whatever is live TV to, a day and age where they actually have some really differentiated offerings. Things like video on demand, things like cloud-based DVRs. My 7-year-old doesn't even press a button on a remote anymore. He just talks into the remote. It's really remarkable how fast things have changed and how the ability to deliver content in ways that make it easy for people to consume it and make it a sticky service that they want to keep really create a lot of value. So content's going to need to be central. Now, if you take it one step beyond that, you could certainly see a case where the cable companies, given that some of them own content of their own, whether it's proprietary or networks that they own, right, where they could really utilize that content strategically, much as we've seen over-the-top services do, where they have proprietary content that people use to make them want to subscribe. But regardless of how they do it, enabling people to now consume content essentially anywhere, anytime, what they want, is something the cable companies could really excel at. And it's something where we see some, not all, of the incumbent wireless companies starting to invest as well, right? Creating over-the-top services to enable content delivery, because I think that they see it coming. They see that content, particularly video, and to a lesser extent audio, is really, as the old saying goes, content is king. And so they really do want to create that kind of relationship that the cable companies have been so good at for the last couple of decades.
So how do we think about mobility in that context then? Is this something where you're taking a customer who may already have, broadband and or cable service, making them stickier? Is it really central to something like, as you said, a content delivery strategy where, you're not just going to be able to access this on your home devices, or over your Wi-Fi network. There's a true, mobility aspect to the content as well. Thoughts on mobility?
Well, mobility is really a harsh reality for the cable companies, and something that they've known for a long time was coming. The reality part of it is that most content these days is consumed on these little tiny screens here, and that's just how people are wanting it. So in some ways, they're following the audience. But I like to think that there's actually a little bit more to it than just that. Mobility presents a couple of opportunities for the cable companies. First of all, and perhaps most obvious, it's a potential revenue uplift for them, right? It's a new set of revenue streams, dollars that they're not seeing today. Yet in some cases, they're actually paying for. Funny enough, the cable companies have really not said boo about being the primary backhaul pipe for a lot of mobile traffic for years and years. They're already carrying a lot of it over their Wi-Fi networks, and in some cases over femtocells that are plugged into their networks in people's homes and offices. So they're already in the mobile mix in some ways today, yet they don't really have the customer relationship. But the bigger part of it, and I think what's really behind a lot of these moves, is an opportunity to preserve or at least slow down some of the chipping away of the existing revenue streams that cable companies have. Cord cutting, cable cutting has been a really big reality for the last few years. We see, sort of, in many cases, kind of single-digit declines in some of the services. Some have been faster than others, right? Home phones have gone away much more quickly than I think anybody expected. But, video subscriptions have seen a lot of attacks on them, and even home broadband is perhaps threatened as well. So the ability to bundle mobile and really bring that to make those services stickier and kind of drag your feet against the decay of the subscriber base in those is a great proposition for the cable companies. And that's really a huge value opportunity for them. Quite frankly, those services have so much margin still associated with them that if they can preserve, even if you stretch out the average customer life cycle by a few months, you really create a ton of value. And it opens the door to do things like subsidizing the mobile service itself and creating a really strong competitive price base. And that's even before you get to the point of, can we carry most of the traffic over Wi-Fi? That's just another opportunity there.
Yeah, and if you're a mobile player, then presumably you can kind of flip that and say, well, here's some new revenue opportunities on on the broadband and the content side, that they may not necessarily have had just as a standalone with a standalone wireless customer.
Very true, and in fact, one of the things we've been exploring is, especially with the advent of 5G, and you see a lot of the trials moving towards fixed wireless.
Yeah.
Are we really redefining the basis of competition for the mobile industry and the cable industry, right? If all of a sudden the cable companies start to be able to provide mobile services, and perhaps with 5G, the mobile companies start to be able to provide what used to look like cable services, right? You're essentially a fixed wireless, fixed broadband kind of player, at least in the early years with 5G. The lines really begin to blur between those different segments. So this is one of the challenges, not just for the industry, but even for regulation. When in the past we've had, economic indices that talk about levels of concentration in industry. Well, there's a fundamental question being opened up here of just who's my competition. That's yet to be answered.
Okay, great. Well, then we're going to leave it there, and I guess we'll find out over the next few years. So, all right, Dan Hayes of PwC, thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thanks, Kelly. Always a pleasure.
All right. Well, these guys know their stuff, so hopefully that gave you all some things to think about as we see the impacts of some of the major industry mergers that are going on, as well as new strategies when it comes to where operators are putting their energy and effort, whether they're wireless or wireline. So thanks for joining RCR Wireless News this week for Carrier Wrap. We'll see you again soon. Thanks.